All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. And you always say you never really know where we're going to end up or what we're going to discover.
Well, that's for sure.
And this one's no different. I mean, who would have thought we'd be talking about musical theater today?
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah, especially from, our main source being a year 5 educational document
Yeah, I know, right?
for like 10-year-olds.
You would think, like, how much could you really glean from that, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty fascinating. It's actually, like you said, it covers everything from like opera to these like modern jukebox musicals and everything in between.
Yeah, it really like lays out a good foundation for like the history and just the variety of musical theater in general, like you said, from opera all the way to like rock and hip hop musicals and everything in between.
Yeah, and like even just like the vocabulary, I was looking at it and I was like, oh wow, like even me, like I know a little bit about musical theater, but there's some terms in there that it's like, ooh, what is this? I don't know this.
Yeah, like character song versus action song.
Right, exactly.
Or, composer versus lyricist and librettist. Like, there are all these different roles.
Yeah. Well, let's start there then. Like, let's get into like all the different roles because I think that's important to understand. Like, who's doing what?
Yeah, and, to understand that musical theater is such a collaborative art form, that really all of these roles are integral to the final product.
Right.
So we have, the composer who obviously writes the music, the lyricist who writes the lyrics, but then we also have the librettist.
Oh yeah, who writes like the book, the story?
Yeah, the story, the dialogue, the script basically of the musical.
Right.
Then you have the director who kind of oversees the entire production.
Right. Right.
You have the choreographer who, stages all of the dancing.
Right.
The set designer, the costume designer, the lighting designer, the sound designer.
Oh my gosh, it's a lot.
The musical director who conducts the orchestra. And then, of course, all of the performers.
Then of performers. Yeah, it really does take a village.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like you think about like a huge show like Hamilton, right?
Right.
Like that was obviously Lin-Manuel Miranda's brainchild. Like he was, the composer, the lyricist, the, main actor. But like there's no way that would have become what it became without all those other people involved.
Yeah, could you imagine Hamilton without, the amazing set design or, the amazing costumes or the choreography or any of the, all of those things really work together to make the show what it is.
And bring his vision to life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, even from there, we can kind of jump into these different types of songs, like you were talking about character songs versus action songs.
Right.
So, character songs are songs that really like dive deep into a character's emotions or their motivations.
Right.
They kind of tell us more about the character, who they are.
Right.
And then action songs are songs that like move the plot forward. Right.
So they're very like high energy usually. And,
Right.
something happens in the story during those songs.
Like that would be like My Shot from Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example of an action song.
Yeah. High energy moves the plot forward.
Yeah. And then, for character songs.
Like Helpless.
Yeah, exactly. Like Helpless is like her, falling in love with Alexander Hamilton. And we kind of get to see like her, inner monologue in that song.
Yeah, you're right. It's like all her, hopes and dreams and everything.
Yeah, exact.
At that point in the play. Yeah.
Exactly. So
it's interesting.
And those two types of songs really like work together throughout musicals.
Yeah.
To, create a really like
dynamic experience.
Exactly, like a dynamic story.
Well, and speaking of story, I mean, this year 5 document like actually lays out like the history of musical theater in a really concise way.
Yeah, it does. It's a really like great timeline.
Yeah.
And like you said, it starts with opera.
Which, was popular in like the 16th and 17th centuries.
Right.
And like you mentioned, Hamilton being a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
Opera was a cultural phenomenon for centuries.
Like that was the thing.
Yeah, like it was the thing back then.
Yeah.
And so it makes you think like, what kind of cultural shifts led to opera's rise.
Right.
Like what was going on in society.
Right.
And like how did it reflect those kind of societal values or anxieties.
Right.
I don't know. Something to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But then, tastes change. And so we see operettas emerge.
Right.
Which are like lighter.
Yeah, a little more comedic.
Yeah, more comedic.
Yeah, like Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Pirates of Penzance.
Right.
Which is still popular today. So
Yeah.
you can see like how these things kind of carry through.
And resonate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's like hundreds of years old.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But it's still popular today. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, with the advent of cinema.
Film musicals.
Yeah, the film musical kind of took center stage.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't just, adapting stage productions into film.
Right.
It was creating this whole new genre.
Right.
Like with movies like Singin' in the Rain.
Right.
Pushing the boundaries of storytelling through song and dance on the screen.
It's interesting, too, because, like, the film musical then, like, influenced the evolution of musical theater.
Yeah.
Like, with, like, the book musical, becoming, like, a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's like, the story is just as important as the music.
Right. It's this seamless integration of song, dance, and dialogue.
Right.
And then, that led to what many consider like the golden age of Broadway with, classics like West Side Story, The Sound of Music, Fiddler on the Roof, all tackling like really complex themes and,
and captivating audiences.
Yeah, exactly. And then, more recently we've seen the rise of jukebox musicals, which use pre-existing popular songs to kind of craft new narratives, like Mamma Mia.
Yeah, who doesn't love Mamma Mia?
Right.
Like, I'm there.
Right, and it's like pure nostalgia wrapped up in catchy ABBA tunes.
Right, exactly. And it's like that with a lot of them.
Yeah, and that's like the key, like the nostalgia factor is so huge in jukebox musicals.
Yeah.
Because, it taps into our collective love for like certain artists or eras.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder, like, does relying on these familiar tunes kind of limit the creative innovation?
Right. Does it stifle, the storytelling a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about.
But then on the other hand, we have rock and hip hop musicals that are pushing the boundaries.
Totally.
And bringing this like raw energy to the stage.
Yeah.
Much like rock operas kind of challenged Broadway conventions, decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's like every generation wants to see its own music.
Reflected, right?
Yeah, reflected on stage.
Yeah, which I guess is like what keeps musical theater alive. Yeah, what keeps it...
Yeah.
And constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Which I think is what makes it so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at, this little document that was meant for like, 10-year-olds, it's amazing how much you can really understand about like the history of musical theater and how it's, intertwined with like culture and,
yeah, absolutely.
social trends and, technological advances.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really wild.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, any final thoughts for our listeners today as they, maybe are inspired to go out and see a musical or listen to a musical?
I think a great thing to think about is, the music that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And, what kind of story could it tell?
Yeah.
What emotions could it evoke on stage?
That's so cool.
The possibilities are endless.
I love it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on another deep dive, and we will see all of you next time.
Thanks for having me.